Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
A lot of people who struggle with addiction or parents of, that are addicted, a friend, a loved one in general, it doesn't matter. If you've ever come in contact with a person who suffers from addiction, just period. It doesn't have to be to a specific thing. You just know that it took precedence over their life to a point where they were harmed by it, right? It's not a pretty scene. It is messy. And what I speak about is the intimacy aspect of addiction, which is attention, relationships, love, sex, these things that bring humans closer together, but also could be the very thing that pushes humans apart, right? And so my book is my personal testimony of what I went through and how I came out on the other side. And I'm still every day working towards being a more conscious person and making decisions that are going to help me break free from those behavioral patterns or the hardship or the brokenness, right? Like if you're a human being, you've had your heart broken. So this isn't a one size fits all. This is a everyone at some point or another has loved and felt feelings that make them closer to another person.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's important, like we talked about before, I think it's important that we have this conversation. It's important that we talk about it, just like any sort of addiction, right? The first step to taking care of or dealing with any sort of addiction is admitting that you're addicted, right? It's like the people that stand up at Alcoholics Anonymous and go, I'm Mike and I'm an alcoholic. You know what I mean?
Right.
You've got to get it out there. You've got to be willing to, because a lot of people live in a state of denial.
Yeah.
It's not healthy.
Right.
It's one of the most unhealthy things possible. And you can't get past the first step of the 12-step program, right? Unless you admit that you've got a problem, that you admit that something has a power over you that you haven't had the power to resist. And so now you have to take that power back. And the only way you're going to take the power back is to admit that you were powerless.
Right.
And then take it step by step to take it back, to get it back.
It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing to admit.
I agree with you.
I feel like it
you.
takes many years. Let me tell you something funny. I had a therapist one time, and she had asked me, "Hey, how many years have you been, clean and sober?" And I told her 3. I'm approaching 4. And she said, "Oh, good. Okay, yeah, we can see each other. We can work together." And I kind of was just like, "Well, why? Why? Why were you gonna dump me right on our first date, right? Like, why the agreement now and not just be relieved you have a new client?" And she was like, "Well, the first year of sobriety, you're just coming to. You're just realizing what's reality again. The second year, you start to realize the damage you've done. And the third year, you quit lying about it." And she said, I don't want to work with clients who are just going to lie their way through recovery. We need honest, right? And I'm like, wow. And it made me think about all the times I would put on a facade to try to combat my addiction. Like, I'm fine. Not a problem. And so, I just really had to tip my hat to her because I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm glad that you are willing to see me, and it ended up being a great relationship. I'm a big proponent of therapy, and anyone who's questioning it, I would say give it a try. But yeah, it is an important part of battling your addiction.
I think we need to acknowledge you for something. In fact, I know we do. So not everybody is going to ask that question. So the therapist says, you're 3 years, you're going on 4 years. That's awesome. Great. Now we can work together. A lot of people won't ask what you asked about why 3 years? Why is 3 years so important? Right?
Right.
A lot of people won't even ask that question. So I think it's important that we acknowledge you. Like part of the reason why you wrote the book is because you were willing to stay in curiosity. You were willing to ask the questions that almost nobody else will ask.
Right.
Right. Okay. So let's go back for just a second. I want to back up for just because we got ahead of ourselves a little bit. Right.
It's okay.
So you graduate high school, you decide to go to a place that I'm not a huge fan of their football team, but I'm a huge fan
Oh,
of the people that
come
go
on,
to school
Mike.
there.
We have way better
Right?
things to talk
I know. I
about.
know we
I
do.
don't
I
even
know we
want
do.
to give credit. Let's
I know we
just
do.
leave.
But just so we're clear, okay? Just so we're clear.
Oh
No,
no.
I'm just messing with you. So so
You know, honestly,
you decide to go to a place that's a beautiful campus that has produced some of the most amazing people in the world. And it's
right.
UT Austin.
Hmm.
First of all, why did you decide to go there? And secondly, what was your experience going to school there?
So I decided because I mean, all the wrong reasons. They had some of the most gorgeous football players. I really wanted a top-notch education because I knew
Yeah.
how smart I was. I knew that my family, I would make them proud, right? I was doing it for everyone else, to be honest.
Yeah. Which
I
is the
wanted
worst reason to do it, you know?
I've done so many things
Yeah.
in my life that I feel like I've robbed myself of
Yeah.
opportunity. And, you know, they say give it a good old college try, right? Like,
Right.
I feel like that's exactly the kind of approach I had about life. I'm gonna
Mhm.
give it a good old college try because I'm not doing it for me. I'm gonna do it for you and to
Right.
satisfy you.
Right.
And I want to say that that was the height of my addiction. It took place, um, you know, my first year, and yes, there were so many people that I thought were good influences on me. But if you know anything about Texas, you know anything about Austin, it is prideful.
Yeah.
There is just so much pride. And I felt like the people that were in my life at the time, they were leading me down the path of success
Mhm.
because there's a lot of successful people that come out of Texas.
Yes, yes, there are.
There's a lot of money in Texas.
Mhm.
There's a lot of status. There's so many things that I thought I had to live up to and by, and I wasn't blonde haired or blue eyed,
Mhm.
and I I had to pretend and to pretend a lot.
Mhm.
And I think that again, like I was stating earlier, that my culture got lost somewhere along the way,
Yeah.
and I started partying with people in hopes that it was going to bring me closer to um, rubbing elbows with the right people.
Mhm.
And my name would, you know, get out there to a point where someone would either look at my writing or, you know, snag me for an audition, which
Mhm.
I will say my modeling at the time did hit a peak. It was
Mhm.
great. I'll never forget, I went to Dallas, and my photographer shut down downtown Dallas, this street, just for my photo shoot.
Hmm.
You know, so there was just so much that like made me feel cool. You know, I'm like, I'm hanging with the cool kids. I am, you know, dating the hottest guy and I'm modeling. Like, I just thought that I was the bee's knees, right? Like, I was impenetrable. I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, life is good. All the while behind the curtains, I am doing nothing for myself.
Mm.
I wasn't studying what I wanted to study. My family, um, I my mom's side of the family, they have money. It was oil money,
Mhm.
right? And so there was just like this. path they wanted for me. And I did not want it. I did not want that path. I wanted to be artsy, and I wanted to be free and eat food that, I didn't have to count my calories over because I'm a model, right? Like
Mhm.
it was just so night and day. I was living as two different people.
Yeah.
And I remember dropping out for a period of time because I couldn't do it anymore. I
Mm.
was I was really thin. I got ill. I was drinking. I couldn't keep up with the partying. There was just chaos.
Yeah.
I was codependent on a boyfriend, right? Like I shout out to most college girls who get in that situation because they feel like that's kind of what college sets you up for a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, it's still too young, I feel like, to decide you're forever. I get that part of partying and going and rallying and stuff is the college experience, but for me, I'm like, I wish I would have directed all that energy, time, and focus into something that I love.
Yeah.
And I liked the experience. I liked everything that I went through. I didn't love it though.
Yeah.
I didn't. I Most people I know, they married their college sweetheart, or they, did something with their degree, and they started a family, and they did all these things, and that's great. But these
Mhm.
are people that were born in that town, and they're gonna die in that town. And there's just, again, that loyalty and the pride and the family name. And here I am, this Mexican American woman who's like, I don't even know who I am, and I don't really know who my family stands for, and I just am kind of lost, and I'm surely not going to do anything with an agriculture degree. And I just feel like I didn't really have grounds of who I was then.
Mhm.
It's crazy where I'm at today because I know exactly who I am.
So you graduate with a degree in agricultural science.
Hmm. That I later, I will say, used for the marijuana business, but
The intention though was basically to get a degree or earn a degree that you could then go and apply to the farm.
yes, it was okay. So my family, I don't know if you've heard of Canyon, Texas.
Mhm.
Okay, so Canyon, lots of land. There's Polidoro Canyon there, right? It's
Mhm.
the United States' second largest canyon. So my grandfather, he was an oil engineer for Phillips 66,
Mhm.
and there that money in turn ended up being a big chunk of land, a farmland.
Mhm.
And someone's got to run the farm, right? There's like all these moving parts to my country Texas family that I was supposed to be one of those moving parts.
Right.
Didn't want to.
Yeah. So
Didn't want to.
you get your degree
Hmm.
and you decide to not work on the farm.
Nope. I decided to leave. Actually, I left Texas, and I didn't look back for a very long time.
Where'd you go?
I From Texas, I went back to New Mexico to kind of see my old friends and collect myself. And then I flew to Guam for a friend's wedding. Um, and from Guam, I kind of took a cruise to the surrounding islands like Saipan. And I ended up landing in Osaka. From Osaka, I flew back to the States and did some traveling to Colorado, and then California, and that's how I fell in love with San Diego. It was just one of those adventures. I ended up landing here, which, San Diego's full of lots of transients, and I'm one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So you end up in San Diego. What do you do when you get to San Diego?
I mean, it's funny. The day I landed, I met a photographer. He approached me. I had this really cool hairdo, and he was like, "Can I photograph you?" And I booked a job. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I could stay here. I can
Mhm.
work. And I ended up getting a roommate. Like I set myself up here for a little bit, but then my past kind of started leaking into my present. I had an old boyfriend surface, and it always pulls me back in the direction of don't do things for Megan anymore. Now you got to do things for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I ended up back with this guy, and my dreams got put on hold, and I had to actually end up leaving San Diego because the only way I could get out of the relationship was if I just left. And so I went away for a little while. I went back to Texas. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, let me just go back to where it all started, right? And um that wasn't the right move because I felt so lost. Like, wait, I was starting my life in San Diego and now I'm back in Texas. And
Yeah.
I came back to San Diego. Lots of bopping around. And that time I told myself, no alcohol, no boyfriends, just focus on you. That lasted for about 8 months. And then I realized I need help. I need help. I can't navigate this. I am throwing everything away because I simply haven't addressed the real issue here.
Hmm.
Yeah. Lots of back and forth.
So, do you go into therapy at that point to address the real issue?
No. I just spiral out of control.
Hmm.
So I felt like I was a failure because here all this money, which by the way was grandparents' money for school, right?
Mhm.
Um, all this money was invested in me, and I am kind of just acting like a spoiled brat.
Mm.
And I'm calling my parents asking them for money, right? Just like to feed my habit.
Mhm.
Um, Little did they know that like that money was going towards my habit. And my habit was just being a brat, really. I'm talking, I would go to the Manchester Hyatt here in San Diego
Mhm.
and have expensive cocktails with people who drove Audi R8s, right?
Mhm.
It was like I was gravitating towards other people's success and hard-earned money, but I didn't want to stop and slow down enough to just do it for myself.
Hmm.
It was like I could have easily done that. I could have easily had some monetary success and been happy with like pursuing all that schooling and following my, career, whatever that may have been. I just couldn't slow down long enough to do that.
Hmm.
I was just so like, what's next? What's next? The thrill, the excitement, I didn't want anything mundane. And so
Mhm.
I kept asking my friends at the time, like, hey, what are you doing? Maybe I can take from you, right? Like, what's
Mhm.
your profession? And at the time, they were like yoga instructors. They were doing things that were calm and peaceful.
Mhm.
And Mike, that wasn't me. I'm like, I'm not calm and peaceful. I can't be a yoga instructor. Like,
Mhm.
I am wired way too high frequency for that. So I needed something fast.
Mhm.
And that's when I'm like, well, this modeling gig seems to be fast. This lifestyle of meeting people who live fast as well. Like, let me just go that direction. And
Mhm.
it was not where I needed to be. It really
Mhm.
wasn't. It just they had the worst influence on my life, and it only made me dig a little bit deeper into alcoholism, the party scene, the nightlife, and everything that comes with the nightlife, right? It's a very dark place.
Mhm. So at some point, you make the decision to write this book.
Hmm.
Talk about that for a second, because there are people that
Yeah.
are listening to this podcast that are thinking about or have been thinking about writing a book, and they haven't taken that step. Talk about that process that you went through to make the decision to write the book.
So I had started writing this book actually when I was in San Diego my second time.
Mhm.
When I was coming across some crazy stories, we're talking wily stories that, you normally only see in movies, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, I need to document this. Like, this
Yeah.
is crazy that this is my life. And so I started taking notes. just started taking notes, and then my journal. And then that kind of transpired into audio, right? Like I have a thought and I'm out. And before you know it, there's just this composition of real life stories. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna write a book. And I have this really cool leather bound book that I went ahead and started transcribing everything, put it in chronological order, and was like, one day I'll find someone who's going to publish this for me. And it wasn't until last year did that actually happen.
Mm.
I kept putting it off because of self-worth, right? I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm good enough for people to actually read this, or
Yeah.
who's gonna like it, or the self-consciousness of like, should I even write that? Because that's a little too much, right? I kept filtering out of like, oh, what can society or the world handle? And that's not my job. It is
Mhm.
not my job to tell people what they can and can't handle. My only job was to make sure that I put a content warning in
Mhm.
here, and all rights reserved.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, I need to give this some thought of whether or not I really want to do this.
It's like an
Here's the
imposter
thought.
syndrome, right? Where you're
Yes,
where you're
imposter
like, "Who am
syndrome.
I?" And
Absolutely.
what in the world is the world gonna see in the value of my story, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's some wild things in there and all that, right? So how many let me back up for a second. How long have you been journaling?
Since I was like 16.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you've got a couple of years anyway, because you're 20 now, right? So
I'm 33.
I'm messing with you. I'm messing. So you've got basically you're 17 years into roughly, right, into
Right.
journaling. So
Right.
you've had some years where you've lived. So you journaled about high school, you journaled about college, you journaled about after college, right?
Right.
Journaled about your travels and your experiences and that kind of thing, and the times you were in San Diego and all that.
Right.
You took that along with audio recordings and basically compiled it together, and
My life.
that
My
created
life.
a book.
And that was the one thing I traveled with. I could up and leave and go somewhere, but the only thing that was a concern of mine was to take my words with me.
Right.
And being in active addiction, you get amnesia.
Mhm.
You don't really have a clear mind of what had happened, what was said, or what was done. It wasn't until I had 8 years, because I am today 8 years clean from alcohol and substance abuse. And I'm going on 4 years of clean time with my sex and love addiction, right?
Mhm.
That's my codependency on other people. And so it wasn't until last year did I decide I'm going to go ahead and lump these two together.
Mhm.
I'm going to write this book because I finally now am not suffering from imposter syndrome, right?
Right.
I know who I am. I had to go on that long journey.
Yeah.
And the moment that made me decide I can't do this anymore is when I woke up one day and realized it was like Groundhog's Day,
Mhm.
right? There's just this like, I can't do another day on repeat. Like, I really want something different.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like put, I knew I was a hard worker.
Mhm.
I knew that I wanted something. There's that leadership you mentioned that you noticed, and I felt like I'm finally going to be the leader of my own life,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to look to anybody else's influence to lead me, because you can't attain sobriety through osmosis, right? You can't just wake up and say, "Hey, I got 8 years clean," when in fact you're drunk or high that day,
Yeah.
right? So I had to put in those hours. I had to put in the time, the work, the effort. And I'm one of those people that when I put my mind to it and make the decision to do it, and I needed help though.
Mhm.
I knew I was going to accomplish it, but I needed help. And that's what's so important for listeners to understand, is that no one wrote my book for me. I
Mhm.
wrote it,
Mhm.
but I did have help from the studio that published it. I had help from even my stories and past events who gave me the whole book itself, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
without all that experience, I'd have nothing to write about.
Right.
And then now you know, like, there's so many moving parts, there's so many variables into how this came to be, but it all had to happen when I gained my self-confidence back.
Mhm.
And that really only took place just recently, even though
Mhm.
I had been clean for so many years. You know, there's this
Mhm.
funny saying that, you know, you can't, just because you quit drinking doesn't mean you're still not a piece of shit, right?
Mhm.
Or, you know, a bad person.
Mhm.
And I felt like, wow, I want to be clean and be a human of substance
Mhm.
and power, right? Like, so what more work do I need to do? I
Right.
went on that journey. I worked a program. I read a lot of books because let me tell you, authors know that you got to read in order to
Mhm.
write.
Yeah. It's
So
true.
I just think there's so many important aspects into staying clean, not just getting clean, but staying clean. And so yes, here we are. Last year, I'm like, I am a mother of two children.
Mhm.
I need a legacy to leave behind.
Mhm.
Big motivator.
Yeah.
And let's break some generational curses. Let's educate, let's talk.
Mhm.
What better way to talk than to go back to the fundamentals of pen to paper,
Mhm.
right? It's there's a method here to my madness, and once I was able to sort it all out, organize, I found the perfect studio. She Rises Studios outside of Pasadena, California.
Mhm.
They're the ones behind my book. They're my publishers, and they did an amazing job just with the support and even the editor that I worked with. You know, it's not easy having to face your past.
Mhm. I agree.
And they were there for me the whole way. They were there for me. And so yeah, now it's all about getting on a level with other people of this hard topic.
Mhm.
Are you ready to hear about it? Are you not? Do you think you are? If maybe you want to dabble, like you have a couple questions, you know, it's all relevant. You're
Right.
allowed to ask, right? Because that picture is me on a bed.
Mhm.
You know, it's very insinuative and skin crave.
Mhm.
I used to crave something and now I can say that it's under control,
Mhm.
right?
So, couple of questions.
Yes.
Number 1, what was the single most important thing you learned writing the book?
That I could forgive myself.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, because forgiveness is not just stamp it and it's done with.
Yeah.
It's something like a brain exercise you have
The
to do
process.
every day.
It's a
It's no
muscle.
different. It's
Yeah.
no different than going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to do your mind gymnastics as well, and forgiving myself was the most important part because you know, if you're familiar or anybody out there listening is familiar or not, one of the steps in working a program, a 12-step program is making amends, right?
Mhm.
And I had to make amends with myself because
Yeah.
when you realize all the garbage and drama and everything that had been created and you were at the center of it,
Mhm.
it's not easy. It's not
Yeah,
easy, you know?
it's true. It's true.
So
One last question. What is the one thing that if you had it to do over again, you would do differently?
I would have talked to the people who have lost their lives because part of my content warning is there is suicide.
Mm.
There is death in addiction.
Mhm.
And if I could go back and redo, I think I would have done everything to get these people help. You know, I wasn't very educated on suicide. And if I could redo that, I would have educated myself. I would have spoke about it more, you know, I would have addressed some of these qualms that, you know, even today we go through about suicide, because there's no coming back.
Yeah.
So
The ultimate final answer. So let me ask you this, or let me just throw this in. I want to acknowledge you for something. We talked about this on the beach, and I felt like it was incredibly important. A big part of why people have things like PTSD and addiction issues and self-esteem issues and all of the things that sort of snowball into the ultimate act of taking one's life, right? Getting to that place where you feel like that's the only option.
right.
What you're doing by bringing these things to the front, by writing the book, by getting things out there where people can talk about it, they can chew on it, they can admit that they have a problem, right? They can admit that they have a challenge. Like, one of my biggest things is how a lot of the things that you talk about in the book are something like we talked about at the beach that day, are things that people suppress. They hold them in, right? And what happens when you hold things in like that is you feel like you're isolated, you feel like you're lonely, and you feel like you're more lonely, right? We've had people on the podcast that are experts at dealing with PTSD. They're experts at dealing with suicide type behavior. They're experts at dealing with emotions and dealing with all of these things. And one of the things that they'll tell you is the biggest thing they can do is intervene. The biggest thing they can do is get a hold of that person and say, look, you're not by yourself. You feel lonely, but you're not by yourself. There are people outside of this tiny little focus, this myopic focus that you have. There are people outside of here that care about you, right? And I want to acknowledge you for the fact that it took a great amount of love for you to write this book. It took a great amount of courage for you to step out and take this subject on. And I cannot thank you enough for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience.
Absolutely. I'm very grateful that you are, you know, helping me bring awareness. You know, it's really a beautiful thing when somebody can feel hope.
Yeah.
And know that loneliness, it's real.
Yeah.
I'm not going to downplay that, but we can be a break in the alpha wave, right? We can help somebody, just throw a wrench in their gear and let them know that I'm here.
Yeah.
I'll
Interrupt
talk,
the pattern. Interrupt the pattern, right? Because you got to stop that snowball from going down the hill, because eventually you're going to get to a place to where you can't stop it. So I really feel like what you're doing is incredibly important, and I cannot thank you enough for being our guest on the program.
Absolutely. I thank the Mike Litton Experience for existing, because I've listened in on your episodes too, and let me tell you, they hold such substance, and that's the good stuff, right? As we say in Amarillo, it's the meat and potatoes, like that country that we all want,
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
I'm so grateful. Thank you, Mike.
Take care. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.